Mr. Reiner. I'm president of the Pickens County Taxpayers Association. I'd like to call this meeting to order. We always like to start our meetings off on the right foot. Good to have proper guidance and the blessings. And I'd like to call Mr. Chappell. Alan, if you would start us off on the right foot today with a prayer.
Please. Our Father, we are so thankful for your blessings of this day. Father, we thank you that you watched over us through our errands and wherever we were able to go today and come back to this point tonight. Father, we just pray you'd bless all of our meeting tonight. You know, while we come, all of us, help us to seek your will in all of our decisions that we make from day to day. And this would not be an exception at all tonight, Lord. We just pray you'd just guide all decisions that will be made tonight, help them to be in your will, and just bless and encourage and allow a portion of wisdom to everyone that speaks tonight. And Father, help us to always to seek your will, and whatever we say, Father, help us to be for the betterment of our citizens of Pickens County and the surrounding area. Guide us in everything that we do, Lord, and whatever we accomplish. We want to be careful to give you the praise and honor for it all. We ask all these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Alan. I'd like to remind everybody, please turn off your phones, or at least turn off the ringers, so that if any calls come in, it doesn't disturb the speakers or disrupt the meeting. Thank you. Next, we'd like to pledge allegiance to the flag. We have a flag right over there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. This meeting is put on by the Pickens County Taxpayers Association tonight. The Taxpayer Association is organized to, our goals are to educate people who live, work, or visit Pickens County on the subjects of taxation and the rights of property owners. Contrary to the opinions of some, we don't hate taxes. We do believe in fair taxation, though, and holding our public servants accountable for how they handle those taxes, and educating the citizens about how well they're doing their job. I'd like to point out Mr. Clark over there, Weldon Clark over there. He's our treasurer. If you're dues are due or you'd like to join the Taxpayers Association, you can see him after the meeting, and he can take care of you. Purpose of this meeting tonight is to attempt to give everyone a chance to better understand Common Core. I get newspapers from across the country. I have family and friends scattered all over the place, and it seems currently the topic of Common Core is becoming quite common. You see it everywhere. But all the meetings I've seen and all the reports I've read, they only have speakers from one side. You very seldom see a meeting where they actually represent both sides of the issue. This is fine if you want somebody to just reinforce your own ideas of what it is, but I don't believe that's really educational. I think we have to see all sides of the issue so we can weigh the facts on this. Tonight we are fortunate enough to have professionals representing two interpretations of Common Core, supportive and not. We're not here tonight to debate Common Core or to attack interpretations different from our own, but simply to get our questions answered, get the facts as presented by professionals on the subject, take this information home where we can ponder on it. We may not come away from this forum with a changed mind, but hopefully we can all come away more knowledgeable. Thank you all for being part of this tonight. It's great to see people who are serious about wanting to understand that changes will have an impact on our children for possibly generations to come. I'm excited about what we can learn tonight. I hope you are all too. Our speaker tonight is Sheri Few. who is over here. She is CEO of South Carolina Parents Involved in Education. We also have Sharon Huff. She's Assistant Superintendent for Instructional Services for the School District of Pickens County. The rules of tonight are going to be each speaker will get to come up here and have what time they need, 15, 20 minutes, to present their interpretation of Common Core. And after that's done, we'll take questions from the audience here. We would like as many people as possible to be able to participate. So since we do have kind of a limited time and probably plenty of questions, we ask that all questions be limited to one-part questions only. State your name in the question and keep the questions down to about 1 minute in length so that Ms. Huff and Mrs. Few have time to elaborate on it. I'm sure a lot of the questions will require more in-depth answers for people to understand them. This isn't really, if you've looked at the Common Core standards themselves, it's really mind-boggling. It's not so easy to understand. Mrs. Huff and Mrs. Few will both have the same opportunity to respond to each question, and what we'll do is we'll rotate as to who goes first to answer, or they can pass if they so choose. We flipped a coin, and Mrs. Few had heads, so she speaks first, and we'll give her the floor here to give her interpretation of Common Core.
Thank you. Good evening. Indeed, my name is Sheri Few. I'm the president of South Carolina Parents Involved in Education. We're a nonprofit organization that started back in the year 2000 because we were concerned about curriculum content in public schools. I wanted to start by thanking the Taxpayers Association for hosting this very important forum. I really appreciate Ms. Huff also coming and presenting the other side of this issue. But I want to assure her, as I've already done, and all of you, that this is not an attack on the local school district, that the local school district is simply doing their job. They're implementing standards that were adopted by our state. So when she makes her presentation, I hope that you'll respect that about what she's doing. It's certainly not my intent to attack. But what I do want to do this evening is expose to you some very serious issues with the Common Core standards. So I want to first tell you about our mission statement as an organization. We actually just recently changed the mission statement. But we are a grassroots organization, and we're committed to meaningful education reform through the education of parents, grandparents, and education stakeholders. And the reason that we modified our mission statement is because oftentimes we would talk to audiences like this, and we'd hear from people, well, you know, I don't have kids in public school anymore. Well, even as parents are stakeholders, so are grandparents and taxpayers and citizens of our country. And the reason that is true can be best told perhaps by a quote that I'm going to get to in a minute. I thought it was the next slide. But Abraham Lincoln said that the philosophy of the classroom of one generation would be the government of the next. So that's why I think taxpayers and citizens of our country are stakeholders.
One second. You're turning off.
Okay. It wasn't on.
It wasn't. I thought I heard it come on.
Why don't you turn it
Okay,
on?
sure?
Yeah.
Okay, here we
Yeah,
go.
I'm sure you can do it. All right.
Okay.
Can you hear me better now? Oh, yeah, I hear me now, too. Okay. So anyhow, what I'm going to talk to you about today specifically is I'm going to give you a little bit of the history behind Common Core. I'm going to talk about the problems with Common Core and what the proponents are saying, those that are supporting Common Core, and how do we stop it in South Carolina. Now, this isn't our typical presentation. I've had to cut out a lot of slides to try to fit in the 20-minute segment. And I also added what proponents are saying because we're learning more and more. There's quite a bit of pushback to what we've been telling people. So I think it's important for you to hear both sides of that. So in our opinion, Common Core is an attempt by Washington, D.C. special interest groups, and the federal government to herd the states and our children into one-size-fits-all national standards. And as far as history, again, I've cut out a few slides. Normally we go into a lot of history here, but this is the most important piece that I want you to understand. This is a famous letter called the Dear Hillary letter from Mark Tucker. Right after they won the first presidential election, he talked to her about how excited it was that they had won. This is a very lengthy letter. It happens to be in the congressional record, but we've pulled out just a few things that we think are important for you to see, because this is the initial plan that came about with Common Core. There have been several attempts since this time to impose national standards on states. They have failed in the past. This is the closest that they've ever come to being fully successful. But you'll notice some of the disturbing comments in the letter from Mark to Hillary when he talks about bypassing elected officials in school boards and the state legislatures and appointing a workforce development board. Now, for those of you who are up on what's happening in your community, we actually already have workforce development boards, and they're working in tandem with schools to try to put children into paths of future workforce according to what they feel like they should be doing. So fundamentally, what has happened since that time and is currently happening in our schools is that it's no longer about academia, it's about workforce development. That's what our schools have become. So you can see his goal was to have national standards, national testing, and ultimately that would cement national control. So his plan was to train children, as I said, for specific jobs for the workforce instead of simply to educate them so they can make their own life choices. So how did we get the Common Core standards? Well, it began with the Obama stimulus money. If everybody will recall, back in 2009, the states were dealing with recession and schools were especially hit hard. So the Obama administration took part of the stimulus money, it was billions of dollars, and put it into something called Race to the Top grants. So in order to compete for a Race to the Top grant, a state would have to sign on to these national standards. So before they had even read standards, states were asked through their application, whether they received funding or not, if they simply applied for the funding, they would commit to these national standards. Another way that the federal government was involved with coercing states to adopt standards was through the No Child Left Behind waivers. No Child Left Behind has some very strict requirements that have to be met in 2014. Very few states are going to be able to achieve those requirements, and that's why they have dangled these waivers before states in order to get them to adopt the Common Core standards. At this point, 45 states have adopted Common Core standards and the District of Columbia, so you can see that they have been very successful toward reaching their goal. So let's talk about the standards themselves. Now, you're probably not going to hear this from people teaching them because we've heard a few presenters who are talking about how they are far better than what we had before. But that is simply not the truth. What we have learned through all the research that we've done, and there's plenty of good information on our website, scpi.org, that supports everything I'm telling you, that, and even the Fordham Institute, who evaluated the Common Core standards and compared them to all the other states, have admitted that they're clearly inferior to several states. And some of the other things we're concerned about is the fact that they're being taught to be social justice advocates, and that they will no longer read so much nonfiction but more liberal biased government documents. And I'm going to give you some examples of that in just a moment. This is one of the validation panel members. He was the only mathematician that was on the math validation committee. His name is Professor James Milgram. He has said that the math scheme would place American students 2 years behind their peers in other high-achieving countries. And then when he's talking about the validation committee itself, he said that they weren't focused on things like making the standards, they were mainly focused on things like making the standards as non-challenging as possible and getting their favorite topics into the standards. The new math standards will move addition and subtraction proficiency back to the 4th grade, and division will be pushed back to 6th grade instead of 5th, and Algebra 1 is pushed back to 9th grade instead of 8th. And there's the most troubling thing is the experimental approach to geometry that has never been effective anywhere in the world. It was tried in Russia and failed. And this is the, in high school, that's what teachers will have to learn to teach students. Now this lady is from the ELA, the English Language Arts Validation Committee. She also is speaking out against Common Core and refused to sign off on the standards based on her observations. She says that the English curriculum overloaded with advocacy, journalism, and informational articles chosen for their topical or political nature should raise serious concerns for parents, schools, leaders, and policymakers. And these are some examples. You know, no longer will you have all of these great classics, but you will have things like this. And these are actually in the recommended reading list. Why Obamacare is great, EPA's recommended insulation levels, Federal Reserve Archives, and an executive order, transportation and environment. Actually, I don't think this one's on the reading list. I think we threw that one in just to correct that. This slide shows us, because the other side has said, okay, well, it's not that we're going to do away with classic literature altogether, and that's true. They are still going to read what they call nonfiction. They don't even refer to it as classic literature anymore. It's nonfiction. So these are at what grades in, excuse me, wrong button. In 4th grade, it'll be 50-50 for literature and informational text. 8th grade, 45-55. And by the time they're a senior in high school, it will be 30% literary and 70% informational. This is another gentleman, Zev Werman, who was in the Department of Education under Bush, and he was the evaluator for the California Common Core standards. And he says, I believe the Common Core marks the cessation of educational standards improvement in the United States. No state has any reason left to aspire for first-rate standards, as all states will be judged by the same mediocre national benchmark enforced by the federal government. And I think that's very important to think deeply about what he said here, because we all know that competition, I hope you understand, that competition breeds excellence. And if everybody is doing the same thing and there's no competition, there's no opportunity for innovation and excelling, what would be the motivation to do that? The other issue with Common Core are the new costs. And it will be very expensive to implement Common Core. There's a Furman University professor, Dr. Paul Thomas, has written a couple of opinion editorials that have been published in the state newspaper. He's not even known to be typically or especially fiscally conservative, but he has pointed out that there's no cost analysis that has been done for this. We simply accepted it, said we would do it, and we're in the process of implementing it without even seeing how much it was going to cost us. There's been a mid-range estimate nationally that it will cost us $15.8 billion to implement Common Core, and it's not funded. It's going to be funded through our local budgets once the grants from the federal government run out. And not all states receive grants. South Carolina did not receive a grant, so it's going to cost us more than it will other states. Zev Werman, the gentleman that I pointed to earlier, did a cost analysis for South Carolina. And this is a lowball estimate, he says. He says the test alone will go from about $13 per student to $100 per student. And the reason the tests are going to be so expensive is because they're going to be computerized tests. So every child taking the test, K through 12, in every classroom will have to have access to a computer. Not only that, if you think about South Carolina and the very rural nature of our state, there are many communities that don't even have the bandwidth to support this kind of activity. So all in all, the cost with the computer implementation of the states are going to be what's going to cost us the most. And this is a good quote from Senator Tim Scott, and I like to point to this because our own Superintendent of Education has suggested that it won't be much more money than we are already currently spending or we would have already spent. But Senator Scott says differently. He says that it will cost states billions of dollars to fully adopt. So let's talk a little bit about the testing. The U.S. Department of Education put $360 million into these two organizations through grants, and those grants require those organizations to deliver student-level data to the U.S. Department of Education. And why that's important is you know, what we will hear from folks that are already gathering information is that that information does not go to the federal government. Well, that is all changing now with this system, and that's why they required through these grants that these organizations supply that student level data to the Department of Education. We are currently committed to the Smarter Balance Testing Consortium. So we thought we'd tell you a little bit about Smarter Balance and who's running it. It was designed by Linda Darling Hammond, who is a radical Stanford professor. She is a colleague of Bill Ayers, and she has pushed Common Core in Harvard Educational Review. So let's talk more about the data and the privacy intrusion. I'll have to say that this is the most catching problem for most of the states. And I'll show you a slide in a moment of the states that are just dropping out of the testing alone, because it is seriously troublesome. It is an intrusion on our privacy. So this is a diagram that shows that the information that's going to be gathered is going to be 1,500 data entries, entities, and my colleague here, Jack, has helped me to understand this. So I may, if I get it wrong, Jack, you can correct me. But even though it's 1,500 data entities, it's really 3,000 data points is what will be collected on each student. And the reason that it's going to be able to be shared with the Department of Education, the Department of Labor, the Department of Health and Human Services, and others ultimately, is because in 2011, the Obama administration gutted the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act and allowing them permission to give this data to the federal government, and also, well, as I'll show you in another slide, it will go further places. Whoops, I went backwards, sorry. Okay, now this is a slide that actually came from a training at another state where they were training them how to develop this data system. So, you know, this just shows the complexity of it. It shows all of the data that's going in there. You've got the student data, the teacher data, post-secondary, adult, early childhood, and even workforce, because this new system is preschool to 20 workforce. They're not even referring to it to K-12 anymore, because it's from preschool and it will follow the individual all the way into the workforce. And this information, as I said, will go to agencies, it'll go to the state, researchers, the P20 staff, and ultimately available to the public. Now this is something to show you an example of the fact that this information may indeed even be sold. This is a website that has disappeared since we got this snapshot, but you can see that this is called a Good Student Directory list, and you can buy good student information. And again, I don't think it would be intentional on behalf of your local school district that they would intend for this information to get in these folks' hands, but we have learned so much in the last few months about how little we can trust the federal government, and especially when it comes to our privacy. To suggest that it's not going to end up somewhere else, I think at this point is nearly laughable. So what kind of data? These are some of the data points that will be collected on students. And you can see, you would expect student test scores, but what about total family income, bus stops and times, social security numbers, baptism certificates, life insurance policies, parents' educational levels? That's just a sampling of the 1,500 or 3,000 data points that will be collected, and the data will be stored on homeschoolers as well. And the reason we know that that is true, this is a slide from the Oklahoma State Department of Education where she's giving a presentation on student assessments. And the title of it is Everywhere Data. And in one of her slides, she says that they are also recommending to include student groups not now included, example homeschools, in the data system. So we talk about following the money. There are a lot of people that stand to benefit from this database, and these are just a few that we have found links to. Again, you'll notice in the corner there's a little eraser there with a reference. Everything that we're saying is referenced. We didn't make this stuff up, and we can point you to the reference that proves these points. And bringing it a little closer to home, Clemson University is piloting a project this year. They received $500,000 from the Bill Gates Foundation to pilot biometric bracelets that will measure a student's response in the classroom. So that is being piloted in a middle school somewhere near here. They would not divulge which school is being used for the test, but this is just another phase of this data collection that's on the rise. So I want to just go quickly through what the other side is saying, and I am going to move quickly because I know I'm running low on time, but it is very important to understand, you will hear this, that this was state-led, that these standards were state-led. Well, I beg to differ. I say it was Gates-led. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has already spent $163 million for the creation and propagation of the standards, and they've pledged to spend another $350 million in the next few years to continue to advance Common Core. They started in, let me just point to this amount. The National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers have received $100 million. They are the two organizations that own the copyright to the standards, and they contracted with Achieve to develop them. The North Carolina Hunt Institute got the first pot of money to try to promote the development, and then these folks got involved, and they wrote a document for the Obama administration to guide his work called Benchmarking for Success. And the Hunt Institute in 2009 received another $5.5 million. And let's see, it says to provide state-level policy and communication support to states seeking to rapidly implement Common Core, because that's what they were after. They wanted to do this thing fast before anybody got a hold of what was in it. So to further make my point about it being Gates-led, this is the vice president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, who has received $6 million from the Gates Foundation, and he has said it is not unfair to say that the Gates Foundation's agenda has become the country's agenda in education. And these are some of the organizations that are paid to promote Common Core. So if you hear somebody from the Pearson Foundation or any of these organizations, the NEA, AFT, the PTA, all of these organizations, plus hundreds of colleges and universities, have been given money by the Gates Foundation to push this agenda. So how are the Gates and the feds connected? And the proponents say that this is not a federal program. I believe with the Race to the Top grants, like I said, that's $4.5 billion, and of these 16 awardees, 14 of them had grants from the Gates funds to write their grants. Of the NCLB waivers, they were modeled. I have read one of these waivers from one of the states, and the application is modeled after a blueprint for reform, which was funded by the Gates Foundation, and one was their initial documents to help lead the Obama administration. So then there was the $360 million that we already talked about for the testing consortium. So the tests are linked to the standards, and you have to be linked to the consortia to receive even Title I funds. There are 3 documents that says there will be threats to Title I funds for states that aren't aligned with these consortia. That is found in a Department of Education press release, in this blueprint for reform document, and the President mentioned it in his State of the Union address. And to top it all off, there are 2 former Gates staff. They were high-level staff in the Gates Foundation that are now in top-level positions in the U.S. Department of Education. So to say that it's not a federal program, is absolutely misleading. But what the federal government has done, because there are laws that prohibit the federal government's involvement in states, is they've gone around the law, they've given the money to private organizations, and then they've required states and threatened to keep money if the states don't cooperate. So that's how they got around the federal laws against this. So another thing you hear the other side say is that standards are not curriculum. Well, Bill Gates himself says when the tests are aligned to the standards, the curriculum will line up as well. But I'd like to say, come on, everybody knows that standards drive curriculum. It's just not, it's treating us as though we're ignorant to say that standards are not curriculum. We know that they're not curriculum, but we know that they drive the curriculum. Like I said, the testing consortia contracts also include the development of curriculum and frameworks. So this is the federal government's piece here. So they may not have been involved in the development of the standards, but they certainly have quite a bit of influence over the curriculum itself. And Gates has partnered with Pearson Foundation, and they're a big publishing firm. In fact, they're the largest publishing outfit in the country, and they're developing online curriculum for the Common Core. So, and then to say this part, that the standards will not dictate how teachers teach. Well, if a teacher wanted to teach 80% literature, they can no longer do that. And if a math teacher wanted to teach the standard algorithm for addition and subtraction, they would be forced to teach what we call fuzzy math. And the geometry teachers who want to use the traditional method must now teach Common Core's experimental approach. So they are also saying that national standards will enable equitable comparisons across the states. I think that was one of the biggest sells, especially for South Carolina, because I've often heard that the reason we ranked so poorly in national comparisons was because our standards were so high, so we weren't comparing apples to apples. So that was a big sell to states, and especially our state. But the truth of the matter is these tests are computer adaptive. And there's the definition for computer adaptive. It's a computerized testing. CAT is a form of computer-based test that adapts to the examinee's ability level. So if you got someone in South Carolina taking the test that's not on the same level as a student in the same grade in another state, how in the world can we compare those scores? It just doesn't add up. And the other point about traveling is that only 2% of students in America move from state to state. They also say that teachers, parents, experts, and administrators were consulting in the development of the standards. This is simply not true. There were 3 people on each of the writing teams, none of who were teachers, parents, or administrators. There were 29 people on the writing work group who were primarily staff from the ACT, the College Board, and Achieve, and there was 1 teacher on that writing work group. There were 25 people on the validation committee. Only 1 was the mathematician that I mentioned earlier, and he did not sign off on the math standards. And there was no one from South Carolina that was involved with the development of the standards. They also say that you can add as much content as you want to the standards. Well, that's not true either. You can only add 15%, and it's only on top of the standards, and that 15% will not be tested. So we know there's limited time in the classroom to cover everything a teacher has to cover. So, and you know, they're going to be evaluated based on their scores. So if it's not going to be on the test, it's not likely to be taught in the classroom. So as states consider, this comes directly from the implementation guide about the 15%. It says a literal interpretation by states of the 15% guideline would undermine the very reason the states developed the Common Core state standards in the first place. So even the guidelines for implementation are discouraging any additions. So questions you should ask is, who's accountable if it doesn't work? And for us as parents, that's the bottom line, is we don't have a direct line of accountability any longer. Right now we have local school boards who we can elect, and we can hold accountable for decisions that are made about the education of our children. Well, as I said, these 2 organizations have copyrighted the standards, and they own them, and once they're, now we can get out of them. Not to say we can't get out of them, but as long as we're strapped to them, we are not going to have any influence if we are not satisfied. And that's not just parents, that's teachers too, or district staff. I mean, these standards have never been piloted anywhere in the world. They've never been tested. Our children are guinea pigs, and our teachers are guinea pigs. Bless their hearts. I can't imagine having to relearn every teaching method, adopting these new standards on the promise that it's going to be better for our state, and we have no guarantee of that. They've never been tested. So David Coleman is actually the chief architect of the standards. He was recently elected president of the College Board, which does our SAT test, and he is committed to realigning the SAT with the Common Core. So why that's important, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to skip over that so quickly, but that's how private and homeschool students will be affected. Because we always get that question, how will this affect private and homeschool students? Well, if the homeschool student wants to get into college, she'll have to take the college entrance exam, and if it's aligned with the Common Core, and she hasn't studied that information, and and another key point about this is she could have the right answers because perhaps her curriculum is superior. So the standards may be inferior, so she could address those questions. But the problem is they've changed the testing and the method, is that they're looking for students to explain the process. They're interested in the process of how they got to the answer rather than the answer itself. And I've even seen a teaching demonstration video where a teacher says and gives an example, well, if a student says 3 times 4 is 11, the answer doesn't matter as long as they can explain the process of how they got there. So if students are going to be tested in the SAT with the process, homeschool students would not likely have been able to respond that way. So how do we stop it? And I pulled this quote from the Education Oversight Committee report from the Pickens County School District, and they made these comments above and beyond what was asked for, but they said, we cannot afford to retreat from this initiative at this point in its implementation. If we truly want to make change in public education, to turn back now would send the wrong message to our teachers about education reform and stall future progress. Well, I understand that Pickens County is already 2 years into this, and I can see their concerns over this, but I have to say that the concerns that we have are valid, and I think it would be extremely inappropriate for them to continue based on the costs that have been incurred at this point. This is a map that shows you all of the states that are fighting it now. The blue states rejected Common Core altogether. All of these red states, there are 16 of them, are currently fighting to get out of Common Core. And these are the states that recently have dropped out of the testing. Just last week, Georgia dropped out of the testing. Pennsylvania, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Utah have already withdrawn. And there's strong indications that Florida, I understand, actually Michelle told me Indiana was today. They dropped out of the testing today, and Florida will probably be next. Michigan has already blocked funding, and New York is already looking at alternatives. Whoops, went the wrong way again. All right, and these are national organizations that agree with what we're doing and are helping us because they have produced lots of great reference documents. So if you don't want to take my word for it, if you recognize one of these national organizations, look them up and look at what they have to say about it. These are some of the federal things that are happening to stop Common Core. Senator Tim Scott himself has sponsored legislation to try to help us stop this from the federal level. These are the decision makers in our state, and I say to date on this slide because these are the ones who have the authority now. They're the ones who adopted Common Core, the Education Oversight Committee and the State Board of Education. However, the Education Oversight Committee has not yet adopted the test, and we're really hopeful that we can convince them not to do that. So these are some of what I call the solution makers, because none of this ever went through the state legislature. And that's a serious issue because our South Carolina House of Representatives is responsible for our budget and the spending in the state. And if no one ever even looked at what this would cost our state, there was no cost analysis, and they adopted it without it going through that body, is highly inappropriate. But the bill that we're looking at is this Senate Bill 300. We've got several good sponsors on it, but we're going to be working all through the fall to educate legislators about this bill and hopefully getting this bill passed, which will repeal Common Core. And our goal is to repeal Common Core by July 1st, 2014. We simply can't afford it. I would ask you to help us to educate people about it. We're doing a big statewide conference September 21st in Columbia. Most of the people that I have presented that are experts, Sandra Stotsky from the Validation Committee, Zev Worman, who did the cost analysis. We're going to have Robert Scott, the former Commissioner of Education in Texas, Senator Scott himself. Anyway, several really good experts on this topic will be in Columbia on September 21st, so I hope you will mark your calendar for that. And what we're doing as an organization is we're developing regional groups. And you know, first I started by just traveling the state and sharing information so that people would understand what was happening. And as a result of that, there was such great interest that people asked me what they could do and wanted to start regional groups. So we've had the Greater Charleston Pie in place for several months. This one started about a month ago. Upstate Pie is a group, many people here are members of that group. The Myrtle Beach Pie group is just getting started, and we're starting one in York County. So what you can do is you can contact a member of the Senate and House Education Committee. You can write letters to the editor. Please go to our Facebook page. It's called Stop Common Core in South Carolina, and there's a lot of great information there too. Visit our website, scpi.org. Join the local regional group. Donate to our organization. And please sign up for emails at scpi.org, and we'll keep you informed as this unfolds. This is my last slide. I just want to do a quick review. Kind of a catchy little phrase, never take the apple. And what we've talked about, and I hope that you'll take away with you, is that Common Core is an illegal federal takeover of education with vague and unaccountable governance, academically inferior content, massive unfunded mandates, approved without a cost analysis, and leads to significant threats to student and family privacy. So I would be glad to entertain your questions a little later. I thank you very much for your time, and thanks for coming out.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And you can take a half hour also.
Can I take this?
Yes, you can.
No, it's fine. Okay. Good evening, and thank you for having me here tonight. I'm Sharon Huff. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Instructional Services in the School District of Pickens County. And it's no surprise that what you're going to hear from me tonight is going to be different, and Ms. Few and I talked about this before we started. My presentation really isn't about the politics behind Common Core state standards. It's more an analysis of what we as educators understand about those standards and what we are trying to do in Pickens County to help implement those standards with our teachers for the benefit of our students. Just to tell you a little bit about me and my background, I'm a native of Pickens County. I grew up in Liberty, South Carolina, educated here in the school district of Pickens County. Still live here today. I live in 6 Mile. I have 2 children who attend the school district of Pickens County. So the success of the school district is something that's very personal to me, and it's very near and dear to my heart because it affects my children as well as other children in this county. One of the things that I would like to do is just give you a little overview of kind of the structure of what I want to talk about tonight. And I first want to tell you a little bit about standards-based instruction, what we understand about the history of Common Core, a little bit about the Common Core standards that have been adopted in English language arts and mathematics, and then how Pickens County is trying to make sure our teachers are ready to accept this challenge should it come to pass. As the speaker before me mentioned, standards are not curriculum. They are a set of expectations for students' learning that really outline what we expect students to know at the end of a given course of study, be that English 1 or 3rd grade mathematics. Standards instruction has been around for a couple of decades, really kind of came in force with No Child Left Behind. But as you'll see, there's the rationale behind that standards-based instruction is something that when I started teaching in 1990, so you can do the math and figure out about how old I am at this point, there was a really no set standardization for teachers. When I entered the classroom in Kershaw County, where I started my career as a teacher, I was handed some textbooks and a key to the portable farthest away from the school, and just went about my business of doing the best I could that year to be sure that my students learned what they needed to learn. We did have some skills that were addressed as far as the basic skills assessment program at that time, but we really didn't have a standards-based instruction in the state of South Carolina. That came about a little bit later. most folks who adopt this rationale behind a standards-based instruction really believe that all children should have access to the opportunities to learn the same content, regardless of who their teacher is or where they go to school, be it a local school or a school in another state. So standards also sometimes give our students, our teachers, a common talking point for sharing curriculum ideas and best practices. As I mentioned earlier, these next points really kind of illustrate that standards come to us as teachers at this point from our state level, and then at the local level is where we have to make decisions about curriculum. We have to decide which textbooks we're going to adopt in the state. We have to decide how we're going to implement that, what strategies that we're going to use. And I'll tell you, it's always an interesting process when you get a group of teachers together to discuss curriculum. It's a hotly debated topic. You rarely can get two teachers to agree on what it is they think is the best. They can usually agree on the standard, on what they want to be the outcome, but they're often very passionate about the topics that they cover in the classroom as far as the reading materials and that sort of thing. And it's my understanding those decisions will remain in the control of the local school districts and our schools. And one of the things that I think we are especially proud of in Pickens County is we have great administrators and teachers, and so we rely on their input greatly in our county to give us feedback on how to move forward. Just a little bit more about the standards movement and how that has really kind of fed into the Common Core state standards. As far back as 1996, there were groups really discussing how to support standards-based instruction reform across the country. And Achieve, which I think was mentioned in one of Mrs. Few's slides, was formed out of this National Education Summit and intended to be an independent, bipartisan, nonprofit education reform organization. One of the reports that was created came about by looking at our high school diplomas in this country. And for as long as most of us can remember, the importance of getting that diploma is such a milestone in a student's life, but it's been a gateway to the next step in their life. And one of the things that report pointed out is that maybe battery. Just let me know if I need to repeat something or you can't hear me clearly. One of the important things I think that came out of that report was, what does our high school diploma really enable a student to do? I'm a parent of a child that's heading into her senior year of high school, and we obviously are talking colleges and making plans for that. And one of the things that you'll notice in that report is that we have students that were graduating from high schools that unfortunately, when they hit college, they just weren't quite ready. And I know I want my child to be ready. When she enters the doors of whichever college she is accepted to and chooses to go, I don't want her to become one of these statistics that needs to take remedial courses or is unable to complete that degree. And we do hear from our business community and their concerns about making sure that our students are ready to accept the challenges of the workforce. And so that report in 2004, almost 10 years ago, really, I think, struck a chord with public educators. And so based on this report, work really began to take place at the national level to make sure that our standards were meeting up to the expectations of colleges and employers. And as you can see in the next little comment there, that Achieve did begin to document the efforts of some states that were already beginning to work together to sort of track their standards and see how effective they were in the college and career readiness area. And you've seen this information, I'm sure, that 2008 was really when this initiative was launched. In 2008, that was probably fairly far from the minds of a lot of folks and teachers in South Carolina. But in 2009, they developed those college and career readiness standards to take a look at what exactly does it mean for a student to be college ready. What are we talking about when we want a student to be prepared to go to college? What does it mean that they're ready to enter into the business world and industry? And our hope would be that all of our students would advance into some form of higher education. But the reality is not every student will choose to do that for various reasons. But eventually, all of our students will hopefully have gainful employment in their communities. And that is what will help us make a stronger community. And so based on these college and career readiness standards, these K-12 learning progressions began to develop. You'll see multiple rounds of feedback came from in the forms of states, teachers, researchers, higher education, and even the general public. And clearly the debate's really not settled. There's still a lot of folks who have questions out there about the Common Core state standards. But those final standards were released in June, and South Carolina did adopt in July of 2010. And as Mrs. Few mentioned, we did not join in with the race to the top to get federal funding. Our state did submit a waiver under ESA, and so that actually went into effect about a year ago. And so we have, and you will begin to see in the next few weeks, score reports and that type of thing released under that new waiver. Some things about the Common Core standards that we look at from the educational point of view is that are these standards, and we believe that they are, aligned with college and work expectations? Are these standards focused? Are they coherent? Do they make sense to teachers when teachers look at those? Can they interpret them and know what to turn around and do in the classroom? In Pickens County, we want rigorous standards. We want our students to be ready. We have students who go to local colleges and universities. We have students who leave South Carolina. We have students who graduate and go on to Ivy League schools as well. And we want the students that come from the school district of Pickens County to stack up against students anywhere in the nation. And I think that's just one of the strengths of our community here, is that we value education of our students and we want the best for our children. And so that is why in Pickens County we want rigorous standards for our students. There are a lot of things that if you looked at the South Carolina standards, you would see some similar threads with Common Core. These standards will be internationally benchmarked so that all students are prepared to succeed in that more global marketplace that our students live in today. And they are based on evidence and research. And the mathematics standards, the National Council for the Teachers of Mathematics, are very confident with some of the standards that are there, and they support some of the things that were there because they were doing it anyway ahead of time. This was a state-led effort coordinated by the National Governors Association and the Common Core State Standards Organization. As we look at these standards just from an educational point of view, we want to think about why would it be important that we take a look at this. Currently, each of our states has its own set of standards. There's some similarities, there's some differences. And we believe that for students who are going out and competing against one another in applications for college, on college admissions tests, on rigorous advanced placement tests, that we want our students to be prepared for that and to be ready. Okay. South Carolina adopted the standards for mathematics, K through 12, and English language arts. There's some misconceptions about the literacy component, and I'll address that. We have not adopted national history or science standards. As a matter of fact, the history standards that our students were taught this past year are new South Carolina state standards. So we have not delved into that. Our standards are still state standards for history and social studies. I've heard no timeline about that being otherwise. In 2010-11, when the standards were approved. I think Dr. Pugh was just headed into the role of Assistant Superintendent for Instruction at that time. And I remember having some discussions with principals, and and we knew that if we were going to be ready in 2014, 15 school year, we really had to get started. New standards take time for teachers to really digest and understand. They take time for us to offer some professional development for teachers, and we're fortunate. We've got great teachers in Pickens County who are eager to do whatever is right for students. And so for the past couple of years, we've spent our time working with teachers, helping them understand and develop professionally about that. And then, of course, we have a bridge year in which the Common Core will be used for instructional purposes, and that will begin this year. So we've kind of spent those couple of years getting ready for that, knowing that if testing takes place in 2014-15, had we not gone ahead and done that, our students would have been at a disadvantage. Okay, Common Core. And we've heard a lot about informational text, and I'm going to tell you my background was a high school English teacher. So tell me that you're going to take away some of my favorite classics, and the hair on the back of my neck stands up. So I get that, totally get that. And I was a high school principal at the time that these first conversations began to come out. And we had many, many conversations in my office with members of the English department who were saying, wait a minute, I love teaching my Shakespeare. I want to continue teaching Animal Farm. And we talked about the fact that when we really, really took a look at what was being asked, it wasn't so much that you stopped teaching literature, because I think that was a common misconception among educators to start with as well. It was to get everybody in the school on board and holding responsibility for literacy of our students, and I'll show a little bit more about that in a minute. We are asking teachers to look at text complexity when they teach. And for text complexity, we're asking them not to just consider that a book was necessarily always taught at a certain grade level, but consider the purpose for which you're teaching it, and if that is appropriate for that grade level, and to push and to challenge our students. We've asked them to stress the academic vocabulary that you see that a lot of times stumps students on assessments or when they're reading. I remember when I was first a teacher, I would say, what was the most significant factor? And kids would say, what does significant mean? And I thought, my goodness, I thought everybody knew that. But it's to stop and be deliberate and help students understand some of that as well. And that came as a surprise to me as a first-year teacher. It's to do kind of what we're talking about here tonight, which is give text-based answers, cite evidence. Don't just cite an opinion, be able to back that up with your resources. And then it's to continue and really increase the amount of writing that students are doing. And that's something that, again, as a former high school English teacher, is near and dear to me, because writing is the way that we communicate. And to help our students understand how to do that will be helpful to them when they enter college and the workplace. We did talk about having literacy in all content areas. You won't see in anything I'm going to present tonight any changes with social studies or science content. What you will see is a request that social studies teachers who know how to read like a historian reads, they know to pay attention to the charts and the graphs in the textbook, and they know to how to interpret and slow down and reread and question. It's to try to model that for students as they read in the social studies textbook. As I mentioned earlier, I have 2 children, one of whom reads absolutely no nonfiction text. You couldn't force her to do it. And another child who everything he picks up is military history, nonfiction text. Don't tell my daughter I said this. He's actually a better reader than she is, because he's challenged himself, because reading nonfiction is a little bit harder than reading fiction. The standards are designed around what are called the college and career anchor standards, around reading, writing, speaking and listening, and language. A college and career ready English language arts student, when they enter that freshman English class, at Tri-County Tech or Clemson or the University of South Carolina or somewhere outside our state. With the Common Core state standards, the goal is that students are able to do the items that I'm going to share with you, that they're able to demonstrate some independence in their reading, that they're not overly reliant on someone to instruct them as they read, but that we've gotten them to the point that they're able to read and understand things on their own without significant instructional support. That they're able to read and build content knowledge. We hear a lot in education about reading to learn. And we know that in the early childhood grades, our teachers spend an awful lot of time helping students learn to master the basics of reading. And as they get older, they have to read to learn. And I think most of us probably do that every day, be it just an interest or a hobby or something that we have to do for our job. But we do have to read to learn, and that's one of the areas of focus that we're working on with our students. And then when they're dealing with an audience and writing, that they think about what's the task, what's the purpose, how do I communicate this, what's the discipline, am I writing something historical, am I writing something just for pleasure, am I writing a letter, and attend to the fact that you would attack those tasks in different ways. And not only just to comprehend what they read, but to be able to critique it and ask questions about it to develop a deeper understanding and be a discerning reader. And to value evidence when they speak and when they write. And then we would want them to be able to use available technology and digital media strategically and capably. And I think that, I clearly grew up in a time where digital media was very limited. Unlike it is today where almost everyone has a personal device in their hand that you can look up information on the fly. We want our students to be able to discern what's good information and what's not good information from that based on the sources that they're looking at. And then, of course, one of the keys is to be able to understand the perspectives since we are living in a global economy. This is just an example of a couple of standards that you might see that a social studies teacher or a science teacher or a teacher who teaches courses at our Career and Technology Education Center would be thinking about when they're planning their lessons. They would want students to read closely to determine what the text says explicitly, and then to make some logical inferences, cite some evidence. Don't just give your opinion, but say, according to this source, and be able to cite that and support it. And then, or when they're speaking, to be able to draw conclusions from the text, or to be able to look at two texts and read them both analytically and be able to pull from those and compare the approaches that the author takes with a particular subject. This is a little bit more, and I think this same very similar slide was shown earlier tonight, but it really looks at the distribution of literary passages, which would be what we would tend to think about your poetry, your plays, your short stories and novels, and how that fits into the framework that was developed in 2009 by NAEP. And what it really, and I totally can understand when you first look at this, and when our teachers first looked at this, Dr. Pugh was sitting in my seat, and she remembers the discussions when they first saw that. They really thought that we were going to say to them, cut the literature. What this amounts to is that the increase in informational text as they get older is the rise in reading and literacy being taken on in other subject areas, not just English language arts. So we had to help them understand that they were still going to be able to teach their favorite classics. You'll see something similar with writing. When we teach writing to students, we talk about, sometimes you ask them to argue or persuade based on evidence. Sometimes you ask them to explain something. And other times you just ask them to tell you about their summer vacation. You ask them to tell you something that's just an experience for them. And you'll see in the 4th grade, students do about equal thirds of that. As they get a little bit older, that writing just to convey an experience that more recreational or creative type of writing is still there and it's still important. But as we're preparing students to enter college, having them be able to argue based on evidence, go back to the text and cite and explain is something that's going to be very important for them to be able to do. I think that is probably one of the most challenging aspects for a teacher to teach is writing. It's tough, it's messy, it's time-consuming for teachers, but it's very important. And then also for students to be able to, and I'll tell you personally, outside of my experience as a classroom teacher of English, I really don't write a lot of poetry. Most of the writing that I do today is more in the argumentative or expository type of writing. So I think as we're talking about preparing students to go on to college or to go into the workforce, they really are going to experience these types of writing more often than writing just to convey an experience, which they might do in a personal letter or email to someone. In the school district of Pickens County, we've really tried to take a balanced approach to our literacy. Like I said, we don't want teachers to give up teaching the classic literature at all. We do want them to balance that because we know that eventually that's going to be very important to them the older that they get and the more experiences they have. Our literacy model, I'll share that with them right here. You'll see that it's really divided into 4 equal parts of reading, writing, language, and then speaking and listening. And I'll tell you, this terminology has been around since I started teaching 23 years ago. And it does talk about reading both informational and literary text. We encourage our teachers to read to our students. We encourage our teachers to read along with students in the early grades and guide them as they're still developing as readers. And then we want students to eventually get to the point where they're independent readers. And then the same with writing. Many of the things that I have mentioned, where we will work with our students to help them get to the point where they're able to write analytically and be able to support their writing with evidence. Common Core math. Math is a toughie for a lot of folks. It's not typically everybody's favorite subject, and math is a tough thing to teach. And a lot of it depends upon the student's level and ability developmentally to think abstractly, because mathematics does require that of students. Our Common Core math, we've looked at focusing on critical concepts, what students absolutely have to learn at each grade level in order to be successful as they move forward. We want students to be very fluent with procedures, but we also want them to understand when they're dividing, not just that they're taking this little number and they're trying to put it into a bigger number and how many times can you do it. From just a process standpoint, we want them to understand why you're doing that. What that means, why you, how to help them understand that. And we realize a lot of times it may mean at first being very concrete with students. We encourage our teachers in our elementary schools to use hands-on manipulatives with students so they can see what it looks like in order to, and then move them to the more abstract symbols and signs as well. We are all about wanting our students to be accurate. With mathematics. Mathematics is nothing if it's not precise and accurate. And so we would encourage that in our school district, that our students, it's not just about the process. The process really, what that does is it helps communicate to the teacher where there's a misconception. I'd often hear students say in the classroom, I would ask you, but I don't even know what to ask because I'm confused. I don't even know what I don't understand. So sometimes that understanding things procedurally really helps a teacher diagnose, okay, this is where the student loses it. This is where they don't get it. But we definitely would want them to arrive at the accurate answer at the end. That would be detrimental to the student if we didn't insist on that. We've also talked about the types of questions that teachers use really need to vary, and I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. And to be able to solve multi-step problems, and this is something that some students struggle with. And students have forever hated word problems because they often require multiple steps. And this is something we really stress to our teachers. You've got to be able to help them do that. Okay. In math, I'm going to show you 8 standards for mathematical practice, and these are evident across all grade levels, whether you're a kindergartner or a senior. Now, the level to which you can do these things varies greatly because of your content knowledge. But this would be what teachers are supposed to keep in mind and be thinking toward as they're preparing their students. The K through 8 standards are very much written just by grade level. You'll look and see kindergarten standards, first grade, second on through. When you get into the high school standards, it really looks very different than what our teachers have seen in the past. And so we've really spent a lot of time with our math teachers trying to help them understand what that means. It's not written currently in the way the Common Core state standards are worded in Math 1, Algebra 1, Geometry. There are some states who have elected to go to a more integrated approach. I think some of those states have struggled with that approach greatly. In South Carolina, we had one of she actually works in my department, is probably one of the strongest mathematicians I know, Brenda Ellenberg. She is our data and analysis person at the district level. I sent her to sit on the state standard when they looked at how the Common Core math alignment was going to look in South Carolina. She's a strong teacher. She's incredibly opinionated about math and passionate about math. And she really shared what our perspective is that we really don't need to use that integrated approach. That's not what Pickens County is in favor of at the state level. There was great agreement among many of her colleagues statewide. What the state has done is they have told us you can either or. You can use an integrated mathematics approach where you're touching on aspects of all of these areas in a progression of 4 courses, or you can stay with your more traditional approach and you can keep your Algebra 1, you can keep your Geometry, you can keep your Algebra 2. And very recently I was at a meeting of instructional folks at the state level, and we discussed those options, and at our roundtable discussion said we feel strongly that we need to keep the progression as it is right now. So that is where we stand with those standards and how those courses will be aligned. These are some examples of what a college and career ready mathematics person would look like. And for those of you out there who are engineer and mathematic minded, and I'll say hi to my friend Henry back there because I know that's how he thinks. He's mathematical in nature. This is how we would want students to think about mathematics and to think when they're solving problems, to try to make sense of them, to persevere through it. Not to stop because it seems complicated, but to start trying to figure it out, because in that discussion with the teacher about what the student's thinking, that's good feedback for the teacher, because he or she would then know how to say, okay, wait a minute, this student has a misconception. They really don't understand decimals. I'm going to have to back up and make sure they understand decimals before I can move forward. By the time students are in high school, you want them to be able to reason abstractly and quantitatively with mathematics, to construct viable arguments. There are definitely more than multiple ways sometimes to solve a mathematical problem, and I think we want students to be able to look at how they think and how they solve problems, as long as they are able to understand, explain that, and then get to that precise, accurate argument at the end. That's an important thing. I've mentioned before having 2 children, and they're often my biggest source of learning about education. Neither of my children are especially strong math students. They don't love it. My son asked his 3rd grade teacher, can we just do more social studies? Because we know the math lovers love math, and I want more social studies. But in looking at them, both of them attack math very procedurally. It's step 1, step 2, step 3. And if they get lost in the steps, they have a hard time understanding what they did wrong. And I've seen that with them the more I have learned about secondary math instruction. And that's a problem for students. So let's see, I think I've hit on all of those. Just to give you an example of what a kindergarten teacher would see as to what they would be expected to cover with this topic. When it comes to counting, that the kids would know number names, be able to count in sequence, be able to tell the number of objects by looking at them and counting them, be able to compare numbers, tell you which is more, which is less. They would understand addition, and they would understand that with addition, what you're doing is you're putting numbers together, you're adding to, and that they would understand subtraction is when you're taking things apart. It's important for students to be able to learn the facts and do that fluently, and we want students to be able to do that in Pickens County. And we know along with that will help them as they get into higher level math classes if they can do that more quickly and more fluently. Again, it mentions that they want them to be able to work with, and it even kind of specifies numbers 11 through 19. Starting with base 10 and then working into those upper level numbers and really understanding that 11 is pretty similar to 1 in a lot of ways when you're doing math. And again, you'll see those mathematical practices that the teacher's always supposed to keep in mind when he or she's teaching. This is a sample of some focal points from 6th grade math. And I'll just let you take a second and look at what we're asking our 6th grade students to do. This is a much more detailed set of standards than I think our teachers have had in the past when it comes to exactly what they want a student to be able to do with ratios. It's not just we want students to be able to understand what a ratio is. This is what we want them to be able to do with it, because everything that they do in mathematics is going to come to fruition in a high school level math class, and that math class is usually Algebra 2. That is the first time that students really have to dig in there and understand the concepts. They can generally make it through our elementary and middle school courses with a good bit of just hard work and memorization, but when they get into Algebra 2 and beyond, they really have to dig down deep and understand the procedures and what's going on with those numbers. I mentioned to you a minute ago, we want them to look at things a little bit differently. We read from left to right, and oftentimes we forget that you don't have to do math from left to right, that 2 plus 3 with a question mark equals 5 in the same way that a question mark equals 2 plus 3 is 5. And so we are encouraging our teachers to be sure that they show this to students in a variety of ways, so that as they progress into middle and high school and they begin to see variables in mathematics, that they understand no matter what combination of 2 plus 3 or 3 plus 2, the answer is 5. The same thing when you were looking at the next example, and this would be, and obviously students a little bit older in grades 3 through 5, they would be looking at products and groups and multiplication and division. And we've really tried to encourage our teachers to show it both ways so that students get accustomed to seeing it like that and understanding that it is the same. Those last two are not the same, but the 2 plus 3 and 5 equals 2 plus 3 are. With mathematics, I remember when I was in high school, it was typically you worked problems for homework, you came into class the next day, and your teacher said, did you have any questions? And if you didn't know the answer, you kind of hoped and prayed that you didn't get called on. And then the teacher generally worked out the problems that students said, I just didn't understand how to do number 5. Okay, I'll work number 5 on the board. Here's the process, here's the procedure, did everybody get it? Move on, do question number 7. We've really tried to tell our teachers, slow down. Sometimes kids need a chance to think about it a little bit, to process it, to ask questions and have the teacher kind of talk them through some of their problem solving that's going on in their heads, which is why we've really encouraged our teachers to do that with them. We want our teachers to be very deliberate, to try to ask questions to see if they can understand where students' misconceptions are with math. We want students to be able to turn that around and kind of put that in their own words and explain it back to the teacher so the teacher can understand, okay, they really do have it. It's okay for two students who solve a problem in different ways to disagree and say, oh, but I solved it this way and I got the same answer. And to kind of go through the explanation of why they did that. Again, ultimately, we want them to understand and have a good sense of numbers and what they mean and how to arrive at the correct answers. Really, in conclusion, our focus as a school district has been on trying to understand the Common Core state standards. There's a lot of information there, a lot of information. It can almost be a little bit overwhelming, so it's taken us some time to really dig into it, to learn, to try to ask questions, and really get a good handle on what that means. For us as a school district of Pickens County, we really we could not afford to wait and see, knowing that the students in this county would be tested as early as 2014-15. I'll tell you, we felt like that would not be doing justice to the students that we serve to not go ahead and begin preparing them for the Smarter Balanced Assessment. As part of this, we've really worked to help build our teachers' instructional strategies, to have them, in mathematics, slow down, ask questions, be sure kids understand the concepts. We're working on developing our local curriculum to help get us there. As we mentioned earlier, our teachers have worked with folks from outside the district. They've partnered together a lot, and folks from my instructional department have helped lead them in designing and developing lessons and units that will help them as they try to get our students ready for what lies ahead. And ultimately, we feel responsible for making sure that all of the students in this county are prepared for whatever comes next for them. As I said earlier, we sincerely hope that all of our students take next steps and go on into some form of higher education. We know, and I can tell you personally, like many of you who've lived here your entire lives, the economy's changed in Pickens County over the past 30, 40 years. And we know that our students are probably going to have to compete from some more highly skilled positions than were available 40 and 50 years ago. Many of those jobs have left our county. And so we just feel very strongly that when a student leaves the school district of Pickens County, we want them to be able to go to any college in the country or in the world and be successful in whatever their desired career path is. So.
Much. That was fascinating. I could see the same. You could see the same thing, the same issues interpreted in two different ways, looking at it from one side or another. That's fascinating. Very interesting. We'll open up the floor for questions. Does anybody have any questions for our speakers tonight? Janelle?
Yes. South Carolina Oversight Committee, as a result of inquiries made by the South Carolina legislators, sent out a survey requesting information on where each school district was in their Common Core standard implementation process. In Pickens County District, a response was sent in. The report did not identify who sent the report in. Here is the response, and I quote, "To move away from these standards would be a big blow to education in South Carolina. First of all, districts have invested a considerable amount of professional development funding." And then the spokesperson stated, and I quote, "As we all know, none of our schools can afford to waste funds." The spokesperson went on to state, and I quote, "It is time to put aside the debate about should we teach Common Core standards." These statements greatly concern me. The statements reflect an attitude of our schools
not being the least bit interested in listening to parents and other education experts explain the dangers of Common Core standard implementation, and furthermore represent a dangerous attitude of continuing policies, whether they're right or wrong, simply because we have spent money on it. Why do Pickens County school administrators want to keep on spending money on an unproven set of standards, which many parents and experts, such as the 5 who refuse to sign off on their validity, believe are the wrong course for our children? Are our children guinea pigs?
Okay. You'll respond to that one? Okay.
And thank you for the question. I guess what I would say to you is just to repeat what Ms. Huff indicated, is that we're here tonight to tell you what we did as a school district as it relates to our state adopting the math and ELA standards. That is our responsibility. We have had standards since 2000 at a minimum, and every year we are required and actually receive funds to provide professional development for our teachers. So we do that on a regular basis. Does it cost money? Absolutely. But we are lifelong learners. When you go into education, it doesn't matter in what job you are, whether you're a school teacher or you're a superintendent. Our responsibility is to continue to learn. And so as those standards came about, every year our teachers receive that professional learning. For us not to have our students prepared for the Smarter Balanced assessment that's going to be given in 2014 unless something changes, that would have been a disservice to our students in this county. And that was not something that we felt like that we could do, nor is it anything that any other county in this state has done. So that was our reasoning for moving forward. I will tell you that if it's not the current standards that we have, there would be standards because we do have standards in math, ELA, and as Ms. Huff indicated, we have social studies standards that were just implemented by the state. And there is a group of educators right now that are developing the science standards. So standards aren't going to go away. It's a matter of which standards. And our responsibility as a school district is to ensure that we follow what the State Department of Education adopts and that we prepare our teachers and our students.
Thank you. Do you have anything?
I thought that was a great response, and I think it fits with what I said in the beginning, is that you're doing your job. You know, our state adopted standards, it's your job to prepare your teachers, and I think we all respect that. But in all due respect, I don't think that was the question. The question had more to do with the attitude in the report to the EOC about dropping the debate. And if I could just add, in your other comments, is that we're not opposed to standards. We're opposed to mediocre national standards.
In her remarks, in your remarks, Sheri Few, you mentioned illegal, an illegal takeover. Do you think that really our entire education system is being taken over and that it's illegal?
I do believe that. There are 3 federal laws that prohibit the federal government involvement in the direction of standards or curriculum. So again, that's why I explained earlier how the federal government was able to get around those laws by funding private organizations for the tests. The tests are linked to the standards. The tests are the accountability measure for the federal government to make sure that the states are doing what it is they want them to do, which is to teach these standards. So, and then in addition to that, you know, I think it's really unfortunate in this day and time that we don't seem to have on the federal level any respect for law or the Constitution. The Constitution was left to states, not to the federal government, and that's why there are laws that prohibit it. So, you know, that's our concern, and I do believe, yes, it's a federal takeover, is intentional, and unfortunately, it's deeply rooted with the Gates Foundation and his educational philosophy, and he has had enough money to fund this thing from the very beginning. The timeline that Ms. Huff presented was just like mine, except it left out the facts about who funded all of those things, those forums that happened and those reports that were developed. They all came out of the Gates Foundation, who is working closely with the U.S. Department of Education.
I think one of the things that Dr. Pugh and I talked about a lot over the past few weeks as I was preparing for this was really, we're really not, like Ms. Few says, in really a position as a school district to really debate it politically. It's more from a standpoint of, here's our directive, these are our standards as we have them right now, how are we going to move forward and help our teachers with it? So I probably would not be able to really respond to the political takeover question.
As a high school student, actually all my life, I was a horrible math student. So you're up there talking, and I'm totally relating to what you're saying. But I have trouble with this. Again, it's the federal testing and putting me in a I'm sure, I don't even remember what I tested on my SATs in the math, but I can guarantee you it was nothing impressive. And looking at all this and the standards, and one thing I've learned in life, living long enough now, that things happen in progression. Not only is math taught in progression, but changes come with progression. And I can see this gearing us towards, okay, you're only equipped for this job, that job, because you didn't do well in the high school level here or there on your SATs. All right? Later in life, I went back to school. I became a nurse. I got into algebra. I totally understood it. My point is, we're judging kids like saying you're gonna succeed or fail based on high school testing, when oftentimes we don't take into consideration brains develop differently. What I didn't even comprehend mathematically in high school, my brain totally understood a few years down the road. Put this federal mandate, these federal dictates to us, and what's to say down the road, because this doesn't usually end right here. When the federal government takes something over, it usually has far more steps to it. And what's to say then they say, no, I'm sorry, you didn't do well in high school. You can't have the opportunity to do that. I know you don't want to get into the politics, but if we're really being concerned about taking care of our students, why don't we become the first school district to stand up and say, we want local control of our government. We want to dictate what goes on in our schools.
Mike, when I'm right here beside you, I mean, I think as a school district, we would not ever want to limit a student. I mean, that is not why any of us got into this. As a matter of fact, I think when you look at where we stand as a district, it's about propelling students forward to do whatever it is. I told you I look at education as a mom just as well as an educator. My children are not stellar students. I believe that they will grow up. I believe they will mature, and that they'll be able to do whatever they want. And we see that all the time with students. And I would agree, that would be a horrible thing to have happen to students. It would be. I don't know if this is still working again. All right. It's kind of, maybe a little bit. Okay, yeah, let's chat.
Am I on? I'd just like to follow up and say I agree, and I too have learned most about how people learn through my own children. I had 3 children that attended public school, all very, very different children. One scored like 1360 on the SAT. The other one was labeled reading disabled early on. Found out he was actually dyslexic. but he struggled greatly. But the schools didn't want to promote him. You know, it was up to the teachers whether he would be in a particular track in high school that would prepare him for college. I had to sign waivers on my children to say I would take full responsibility because I knew my child was capable of college work. And he did. He went on and earned a scholarship and did go to college. And then my youngest child was sort of borderline. But I wanted him to have the most rigorous courses available because I knew that's what he needed to get in good colleges. So rather than holding him back in the college track, which is what the high school recommended, I demanded that they put him in the honors track. And he did well, and he earned scholarships. So I think, you know, this whole concept of one size fits all is really troubling to me because of my own experience with my children, because they're all so different, and we know that. Teachers know that. Teachers understand better than anybody that not all children learn the same. You know, they have different learning styles. So even to say that my children and your children would learn the same way is odd. So to think that every child in this nation will be learning the same things at the same time, I think is just really over the top.
Thank you. Gentleman there? No. White coat.
Thank you, sir. And thank both of you ladies for being here and explaining some of this. I heard some common ground, but building on what Sheri Few was just talking about, when my two sons went to public schools, which they did, one did well and one did not, and they had very different academic abilities, and that's just in my own family. And one of my concerns, even going back before the Common Core curriculum controversy came along, it seems like public education in general and the government's attitude has been, again, this one size fits all. What are we going to do going forward, and how would this impact the fact that some students are not going to be able to achieve at a certain level, and some are going to be exceptionally above that same level and bored if they're not challenged and given material that keeps them interesting? Because the smarter of my two sons was the one that stayed in trouble all the way through high school and didn't go to college, and the other one got a degree in engineering from a major university. So would you ladies address that just for a second? And I'm not trying to stir anything up. I really want to know what do we do about that? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and that's probably one of the toughest things that we have to deal with in public ed. Is, I mean, you're exactly right. There are no identical, you know, students out there, yet we in this country serve all of them to the very best of their own ability. For some of our students, they're gifted learners. You do the best to really push those students through gifted education courses. Some students really struggle. They need additional help and support. And for students that need that, we have programs in place through our special education and individual education programs for them. But then we've also put in place some district initiatives to try to help our struggling students. We know that the earlier the intervention, the better with children. I mean, they're little sponges, and they learn an awful lot sometimes before they ever even come into the doors of our schools. And so we made a concerted effort to expand 4-year-old kindergarten in the school district of Pickens County. This will be our second year of offering additional 4K, which we're really proud of being able to do that. That's another 144 children that rather than being somewhere unable to have access to some instruction, we're able to reach those children. We also put into place an Ignite Learning, which is something that we piloted last year in about 8 of our elementary schools. Had a lot of success with it. You know, we really struggle with the idea of retaining a child. That's not something anyone wants to do. Our elementary school principals and teachers in this district fight hard against doing that. But we know that there's kind of a cut point somewhere around 3rd grade, that if students really aren't on level by 3rd grade, they tend to continue to struggle, because 3rd grade is about the time that explicit reading instruction begins to fall off, and students are expected, well, you know how to read, so now it's a matter of moving more toward that reading to learn, and being able to read a little bit more independently, not incredibly independently because they are still young and developing. But what we decided with a team of our principals and teachers from around the district is that we really wanted to do something to catch those kids before they hit that wall in third grade. And so we piloted this program last year. It's going to be in all of our elementary schools this year. We asked the teachers, find the best teacher you have. Find an experienced teacher who knows how to reach students. And we have asked them to help pick, and they have a dozen students who will be paired with this teacher for the school year, and they're going to really work with them on their reading and mathematics and get them on grade level before the third grade. That's a local decision. As with any decision, you counterbalance that. Our principals at the elementary school level believed in it. It proved to be successful as we tested and looked at students throughout the year with MAP testing. They grew. So we feel confident for those students that they're going to be able to enter third grade and be on the same playing field with their peers. Does that mean that everything is fixed and the interventions stop? No, it doesn't. We're charging our third grade teachers. Now you have these children that you know what was done with them last year. You've got to pay special attention to them. You've got to be sure that they continue to grow as readers and that we don't let them kind of backslide in that area. We've also worked to look at the programs that we offer for struggling students at the secondary level. A lot of times high school and middle school students, they don't handle obstacles really well. They're not very resilient. They get frustrated and they just kind of want to throw their hands in the air and say, I'm done. I've got 2 middle school principals here, and they've probably seen some of the I'm done. And so one of the things that we've done is we have our graduation coaches who are working with those students and in a lot of ways help and encourage them that, yes, you can. This is a problem that can be solved. Let me help show you how you can get caught back up with this teacher. I know you missed 2 weeks and you're behind. Let's put a plan in place for you going and getting your work made up. So that's something that we've done to try to help our students, and we've at the middle and high school levels. And we've also have put into place our C3 Academy, which will help serve our at-risk students in this county. We want to kind of get them as 8th graders and help give them a little jump start on high school, a little extra boost with some credit-bearing courses that they can take in the 8th grade that'll help prepare them for the high school math and ELA courses. So a lot of the things that I think you were kind of talking about, there's so many different levels and layers of support that kids need throughout school, from the minute they walk in the door all the way through. And that's how we spend the bulk of our time is troubleshooting, problem solving, and trying to figure out what can we do to help build these students and put some scaffolding underneath them so that they can be successful as they move forward.
I'd just like to say briefly that I think those are all great initiatives, and I applaud what you're doing, but I think we could probably have done that without national standards as well.
I'm sorry.
My name is Debbie, and I just want to propose tonight that the issue at hand tonight is not whether these standards of this core curriculum I just want to propose that the issue tonight should not be whether these standards of the core curriculum are good or not good. I don't think anybody would deny that we all want children to learn and learn certain things. But the core issue should be liberty. As a mother of 9 children, I have found it does not take much money to teach children. It takes love, time, commitment, and freedom. I think we need to unite and agree that we have to maintain freedom in our country. I am just a mother But I did graduate from Furman University, and I do have my master's in special education. But God led me a direction that I never dreamed of. And it was because my children are a gift from God. I believe parents should be actively involved in their lives. We need not just strong communities, as you mentioned, Ms. Huff, but strong families. It is the families where we have failed. The children are suffering. The schools cannot fix the families. I am not a perfect mother. I am humbled that God has worked through my children. I have had 2 graduate from college successfully, keeping their scholarships. Another one is currently at Southern Wesleyan and here with me tonight. She's an elementary education major. I'm concerned that we need to thank Mrs. Few for being a modern-day Paul Revere. She has sounded the alarm. And my question goes not to the ladies that have given their time tonight, but to the audience. What are you going to do with this alarm? You need to use critical thinking skills. We weren't trained to do that in school. I was trained to just memorize and spit back. I didn't learn very much. But God has shown me to think. And I do not believe a national database will do any of us any good. And I think we need to pray and be committed to our families, and we owe it to our children to leave them liberty in this country, not everything dictated from Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Okay. Ken?
I don't know if you took notice on the map that you were showing, but I already knew that, but I was glad you showed it. The state of Minnesota is probably one of the most liberal states in the union, and yet they rejected this. And I can't believe why South Carolina got sucked into this. I really don't understand how this happened. We're supposed to be more on the, I hate to bring politics into this, but I always thought South Carolina was a conservative state. And somebody down in Columbia rolled this right through and blew it right past us, and we need to stop it. And it's all about the big club, the government getting one more control on us as this kind lady. I appreciate what you said, ma'am. I couldn't agree more than 100% what you said. We got to stop the government from taking full control. Who knows what's going to be here in the next 4 years if we don't stop this now?
Do we have questions for our speakers, though?
I'm being a little aggressive because I have my hand up. So, thank you, ladies, for your presentation. Thank you, both ladies, for the presentations. But I have a question for Ms. Few. And of course, you can comment also. I heard about different experiences with children maybe having to need a little bit more attention. And because I've heard one size fits all, I'm wondering, going forward, once Common Core is implemented fully, are teachers really going to be able to teach what they want to teach or how they need to teach? Are these things going to go away? So I'd like maybe Ms. Few to comment on that, and obviously if Ms. Huff also wants to. Thank you.
I don't believe, and one of my slides indicated that already with these standards, teachers will not be able to teach what they want to teach. We know the emphasis on testing. And one of the pieces that I didn't include in my presentation is how that's going to affect teachers, the testing. Now, the Bill Gates Foundation, as I mentioned, has poured millions of dollars in this and will continue to pump money in it until he gets everything that he wants. And one of the biggest initiatives he has, that he has also been funding at the same time, is tying teacher evaluation to testing. And teachers don't want that. You know, they don't want to be tied to these, I would think, they wouldn't want to be tied to these national standards, these bracelets, these biometric bracelets, to evaluate their performance. If a student falls asleep in class, then they've failed. I just don't believe, I really don't believe that teachers and administrators fully understand the complexity of this and what is at risk for our country. And I would encourage those of you who are here tonight from the school district to dig a little deeper. Please go to the PI website. Please read our references. We need you helping us with this, not fighting us on this. I don't think you want it any more than we do. I don't think it's going away, and I don't think Bill Gates or the federal government will stop until they get everything they want. And one of the main things that we should observe is this country had education system that was second to none prior to federal involvement. If you look, we had the best education in the world. So why the change? It's been incremental over time, and you have been guinea pigs in that process. And I apologize for that because we weren't sounding the alarm loud enough decades ago. And to tell you the truth, I've studied this issue for quite some time. I've attended conferences, national education policy conferences, and I've watched these things unfold. This isn't the first attempt, as I said earlier, for national standards. It started with outcome-based education, Goals 2000. Then it was repackaged as school to work. And what has really happened with our education system is we have moved from an academic model to a workforce development model that is tied to workforce development boards, which has corporations and industry from the local community on those boards telling the schools what they need to teach students so they can fill their jobs. Well, as a parent, and your parents too, teachers are parents, why would we want anyone telling us or our children what kind of career they should have in the future? That is a decision that should be left to families, their church, and some of the career tracks that I've seen. I live in Kershaw County, kind of interesting that you started out there. I tried to fight the adoption of these high school where they have to declare a major in high school. That's what we're doing in Kershaw County now. By the time they're in 9th grade, they have to declare a major, and whatever they declare their major to be is what their coursework is designed around. Well, and they're starting to decide at 6th and 7th grade already through surveys which career track they should go through. Well, guess which career tracks are not in the school to work model? Stay-at-home moms, homeschool parents, entrepreneurs. There are no tracks for that. Because my belief is, and I think many of you here share that belief, especially the passionate woman with 9 children, I think we understand that this is an intentional agenda to brainwash the children in this country to change our form of government. Just like Abraham Lincoln said, the classroom of today becomes the government of the next generation.
I'm Bob. I'm from Greenville County. There are several things I'd like to mention, but first of all, I think we need to realize that this is a Marxist philosophy that's being spread around the country. I've got all kinds of information from the internet on this. It's not something that's happened overnight. It's been incrementally coming for years. You remove the Bible and Christ from the schools. You've got children that have no moral values. These people in that Common Core do not want you to read, as a student, anything about absolute morals and values, where homosexuality will be normal and everything else it's abhorrent and evil. And there's up in the state right now a mandatory law that every 6th grade through 8th grade student is going to be required to, and maybe already be required to study the global warming climate change nonsense that is spread across our land. This is a part of the Green Movement, which started in Europe years ago as the Red Army faction. It's spread all across Europe and everywhere. And it is so subtle, but there's a lot of money behind it. As someone said here, Bill Gates, but George Soros is one of the big muckety-mucks behind this. There's another guy that worked with Obama on the Apollo Alliance. I'll pronounce that, Apollo, A-P-O-L-L-O, Apollo Alliance. And there was a guy along with Bill Ayers named Jeff Jones. He was one of the Weather Underground along with William Ayers, and he wrote the stimulus package for Obama at $787 billion. And this money is going to support all these left-wing groups, the environmental movement, and everything that Americans have been trying to avoid and hated for years is going to be made mandatory now. There will be no freedom, as the one lady, dear lady said here. and the freedom to choose is not going to be ours soon. If you look, this is a part of the Agenda 21. I know some people don't like to talk about that as much, but it is a part of it. And it's a widespread thing. You can fight it every way you want, but it's going to take a moral and spiritual war to avoid this. And I tell you, if people aren't right with God, they better get right, because the Lord's coming soon. And that's the one hope that I have. I don't think this world's going to get much better, but we need people to fight from a spiritual standpoint and to declare evil that which is evil and good that which is good. And folks, I thank you for letting me come. I have a friend here, Bob, and we've been going to the school board meetings, but I've been going for over a year. And you know how many people in Greenville County attend the school board meetings and complain about this? Guess. One. Me and my friend Bob's gone a little while. And so I've learned a lot about this, and I'm burdened because the Lord's laid it on my heart to speak about it. And I may not be the wisest guy in the woods, but I spent 12 years working in the federal government, and I saw it coming back then. And I left. I could have had a big retirement, but I gave it up to go and study the Bible and learn how to deal with evil. And that's the only way we can, folks. And I thank you for giving me a few minutes.
I graduated from high school in 1973. At the time, I don't believe there was a federal Board of Education in Washington. We managed to get through school in Anderson County District 1 without the federal government giving us any directions. You guys and us, my family, who's been involved. As a matter of fact, my brother started his teaching career at North Central High School in, same down there with you. I love teachers, and we all want our kids to do well, and we all need good teachers to do that. But isn't it, I don't mean this to sound accusatory, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck, but isn't it your job to come up with the standards in relation to the community and answering to parents and come up with standards? I got a pretty good education without anybody in Washington coming down here telling us how to do it. And I'll add this, I'm a parent of one. She's the most precious thing in the world to me. I had her in private school, and I've had her in public school. And I was never really mistreated at a public school, but there is a big difference in being treated as a valued customer and a nuisance. And in my humble opinion, the way to deal with this is get rid of Common Core and give parents, put the accountability where it's supposed to be with the parents. Let the money follow the child, and let the teachers have to deal with this, compete. This is a free country where capitalism is supposed to be valued, where people compete in the marketplace, and you're talking about preparing people for the marketplace. Let the schools work in the marketplace where they can understand it too. And compete. That's where innovation comes from. Thank you for your time. Oh, the question is, isn't it their job to come up with the standards? That's my question. Isn't it the local school board's job to come up with the standards in cooperation with the community? Is that not their job?
In the present system we're dealing with, it's our job to develop the curriculum. The system that we have to deal with at this time, it's not, the development of standards really isn't a local choice necessarily, and I think you addressed that in your opening remarks. The way that we go about trying to implement those is a local choice, but the actual standards are, it's not really our liberty at this point. I do understand. Thank you. You've been trying.
I'm sorry. The overreaching theme that I heard at the end of your statements and during some of the statements that you were making, was I hear a theme of inevitability. We had to adopt this because it was good for the students, because it's inevitable. I heard that with you, and I heard that with you, Dr. Pugh, that it just, why is it inevitable? I was educated by uncertified Irish nuns, and I received an excellent education. What I see in the Common Core standards are the byproduct of developing my mind and my understanding. Those are byproducts. Those shouldn't be the goals. And uncertified nuns were able to bring me to a fantastic education. Okay? And I don't understand why you would adopt an entire curriculum, standards, testing, because something is inevitable. Things that you even admitted that you don't fully understand.
I will. And I know Ms. Huff talked about the fact that we, as a school district, can adopt our curriculum that gets us to the outcomes. But now also remember, we are a part of the state of South Carolina public education. And so there are guidelines that we follow. That is at the state level. That has nothing to do with a public school system. We fall under the umbrella of the state. The state falls under the umbrella of the federal government. And what you have to realize for us is, I'm not, but what I will tell you is we receive the way in which we educate our students primarily is from state funds. So we do follow the guidelines, and we are evaluated by, and all of that by the state. So for us to say we're not going to adopt the Common Core state standards, we can choose our curriculum to address those.
At a low level saying, we don't want this. What about you? What are you saying to the state?
I will tell you that the SAT, the ACT are the ways in which our kids are accepted into college. And what we want to make sure of is that our standards are rigorous, that our kids can compete with kids from all over this state and from all over the country.
Uncertified Irish nuns.
And you are lucky, because not everybody would have that opportunity.
Who were educated by the same nuns, and my mother was as well, different set obviously, and we were all incredibly successful.
And I will tell you.
So I'm saying to you is, instead of taking your mandates from the top down, we're fighting from the bottom up, and we're asking you to join the fight from the bottom up instead of just bowing from the top down.
And I appreciate your point. I do appreciate your point.
If you cave, we're gone too.
I appreciate your point.
I'd like to follow up. Excellent question, difficult question for you, I understand. However, there has been a school district, and we were both trying to figure out what it was, and we will get back to you on that, that has said to the state, we are opting out of Common Core because their local school board decided it was not what they wanted for their school district. Now, I don't know what's going to transpire from that, but it's a first step, and I think that's what she's asking you, and that was my plea to the teachers earlier too, is dig a little deeper, look at this. The things we're saying are not lies. In fact, unfortunately, some of the things you presented in your slide that I know you got from the folks that trained you are untrue. And I pointed those out, and we have the reference form. So I'm saying, do your homework. Figure out what is true, because what is true is what's going to save us from this. And I think you hear passionate pleas from your community to help them stop this. And we're doing everything we can. And for you, ma'am, another thing that you can do is, because the authority, unfortunately, is not in their hands, except to the extent that I've just explained, is you need to contact your representatives. Because I believe, isn't Senator Martin from this area? Is it? Hey, he is sold out on Common Core. You guys need to be ringing his phone off the hook and tell him if he wants to keep his job, he better stop this thing. Okay? That's just my advice to you. S300 is the bill.
So courteous. multiple times during the night that you as a school board drive curriculum and not the standards. And my question for you is, if you choose curriculum and you are able to drive that curriculum, can you therefore choose a textbook that is not compliant with Common Core standards? And if the answer is no to that, then you don't drive the curriculum. And so that's, in my eyes, a falsehood that is being perpetuated that, you know, I appreciate you ladies being here and presenting the facts and what your job is, and you have a very difficult job. I would not want to be in your shoes. But again, let's be very honest about what is going on with the curriculum, because I think it's very disingenuous to say that you're controlling the curriculum.
And just a word about textbook adoptions and the way that we handle those. They really are on just kind of a rotating basis from the state, and they're up for adoption as funded. And lately we've had some funding issues in the state of education, so we've not always been able to adopt new textbooks. But what we do in our county is we get our teacher input as well on textbooks, and we in essence kind of put it up to a vote and a decision made with our teachers and our school textbook coordinators about which textbooks we would get. It would probably be not real responsible of me to say what we would and wouldn't adopt, depending on what the choices are and what the feedback is from those teachers. I mean, if those teachers felt very, very, very strongly, I mean, we would certainly have to listen to that and take that into advisement. And if that were the way that we needed to go, that's certainly what we would do. With that being said, and I know that I've said this a couple times tonight, we feel a responsibility to have your students prepared for whatever it is they're going to face. With that being said, so whatever decisions we made, we're going to make in the best interest of making sure that we've done whatever we can to help prepare them for whatever, if it's an assessment or if it's a college choice, that's what we're going to think about.
Let me say one thing. First of all, I'm glad everyone is here. I'm pastor of this church, and not everybody here is from our church, okay? I'd love to have you all here, okay? We have services on Sunday morning. Anyway, I just want to say to Dr. Pugh, we do appreciate everything you do. We know you carry a huge burden. My question is, how can the churches help you? What can we do to help you?
For letting us host these kind of events. And I think that some of the things that I heard from you is that really the parents play such an important role. And those of you that are parents in here demonstrate that just by being here. Unfortunately, we have 16,000 students in our school district, and not every parent supports and is able to provide. When I said to you, you're lucky. We have children that come from very, very tough circumstances. We have children that come into our schools, they've never been read to, they don't know how to write their names. There's a huge gap. So our teachers are tasked with very difficult things. So churches can help us really by emphasizing the importance of us working as a community, the teachers can't do it all, that it really takes all of us together to help our children.
You can give them all a big hand over there. I've been told that this mural here is going to be on YouTube. Could you tell us where they can find that?
I'll have it listed on YouTube. Here we go. I'll have it set up on YouTube sometime tomorrow evening. If you're on Facebook, if you look me up, John Schaefer, SCHAFERTPE, I'll have the URL on my Facebook page.
Thank you very much.